and then followed by the Eurozone crisis. The reason this story I think is significant is because unless you're really on the inside of these kind of behemoth organizations and you fully understand what actually happened in 2008, it's hard to fix it from the top down, right? You have to see it from the bottom in. And what ended up happening in 2008, which everyone in the world felt, was the effect of massive amounts of centralization and not understanding the kind of risks that that created for us, globally speaking, in all of wealth management and all of money. So how we got started is we actually worked with the SEC very closely in deregulation, in helping them deregulate so that earlier, smaller private companies could be more, could find access to capital much easily. But at the same time, deregulation wasn't just kind of blindly done. What ended up happening was people started talking about infrastructure. People started talking about none of these Wall Street kind of centralized organizations, but actually splitting it up and understanding what the platform effect meant on a global basis. So for the past 3.5 years, Darc has been building one of the leading platforms that connects investors and asset managers from all around the world. Instead of relying on personal connections, instead of having to rely on your own personal banker, you're now able to access the right opportunity that's perfect for you from the comfort of your computer or your mobile app. And the industry in and of itself, everybody kind of understands that asset management is very large, but I want to give you a scale of how large these things really are. Asset management right now is in excess of $70 trillion globally, and about 60% of that is actually just in the United States, which means the rest of the world is either unserved or it hasn't been able to access the right opportunities and it's being kept in cash or it's being behind these cross-border firewalls. But at the same time, investor wealth is growing at a breakneck pace, whether through cryptocurrency or through traditional economic growth. We're going to see more than $220 trillion of investor wealth that needs to be addressed and protected by 2020. But at the same time, people aren't investing in stocks, bonds, and cash anymore. They're not using these traditional methodologies to preserve their wealth. They either go into cryptocurrency, they're looking for alternative assets. But how do you access any type of alternative investments, like hedge funds, venture capital, private equity, real estate? What are the traditional channels that exist today, and how can we make that even better? But an industry that's more than $15 trillion right now, so that's a small subset of the total asset management industry, it faces so many different problems today, and those kind of inefficiencies are basically what caused 2008, what caused Madoff, the Ponzi schemes. And even beyond the Madoff Ponzi scheme, actually it almost happens pretty frequently because there's no transparency in the industry. And like I said, the lack of transparency has created massive opportunities for people to be bad actors and for people not to do the right thing for that ecosystem. Because there is no incentive for me to protect the ecosystem, there's only incentive for me to profit right now. But at the same time, rules, including South Korea about ICOs, or the United States about different types of stock offerings or ICO offerings, it's changing every day, and it's not like regulators are talking to each other every day to make sure that they sync up, which means that the regulations that are designed to protect investors are actually keeping them at the sidelines because it's harder for them to access these opportunities. And what's actually worse about the whole thing is that historically, for the last 30 to 40 years, all of these interactions have been done offline. Literally, I'll give you a stack of papers that you'd have to read, or you can pay your lawyer $10,000 to read it on your behalf, and then he'll sign it, and then it'll go into escrow, so the whole thing will take about 6 weeks after I've decided to make an investment, but it'll cost me 2 to 3% to get processed, right? There is no incentive to take care of me or make the investor whole or ensure that their wealth is being grown in the most responsible way. And all of these first three things result in the fourth thing, which is an increase in compliance costs, which means these organizations or these entities that are providing you with the wealth generation capability are actually becoming more expensive. And what happens when it becomes more expensive for me to cater to a customer? I cut off the customer. I don't want that customer anymore, which means the smaller everyday investor increasingly becomes more difficult to access. I keep going to the bigger funds because the cost of me taking $10,000 is about the same as me taking $10 million. I'll just cut out my customers. So how do you create new efficiencies, and what has Dark Matter done, and how are we evolving to make it even better for investors and a more responsible ecosystem? We've created a global fintech platform that basically automates a lot of the workflow right now that's being done offline, that's being processed, where people tell you this is very complicated. These are only for the lawyers. We've automated about 70 to 80% of that workflow. That results in a direct connection between an investor and an investment product. While we work particularly within the asset management industry, that's just the beginning. The reason we focused on that was because it was the most shielded, but no one was able to effectively crack it. Because like I said before, you have to be on the inside to understand what needs to be unraveled and dismantled and then brought back together. And we're the only platform right now that's providing cross-border investment opportunity. You know, we talk about fintech, we talk about efficiencies, but what are the real efficiencies if I can't access the right opportunity from a different country because there's a geographic barrier? Right now, technology platforms are global, and financial services needs to become the same way. We went very early on to different corners of the globe to understand what are the needs for different jurisdictions, what are the different cultural norms that different investors have that we can better suit to protect them, to create a system that works for everybody. So right now we have 4 offices around the world, but we're going to be continuing to expand that as it doesn't become only our offices, but different nodes and different areas that are contributing into the blockchain system, which I'll talk about very shortly. So after 2008 and Wall Street imploding, you know, we kind of looked at the map and we said, well, is this really a problem for everybody else? Does everybody else really think that it's as bad as we think it is because we live next to Wall Street? And the answer was yes. Investors in different jurisdictions, even not just the financial services, even the technology side, understood that the next evolution was not a software upgrade for the back office of JP Morgan. It was a completely different system that needed to be created from the bottom up. And that's not to say that these organizations are going to be put in the sidelines while we're working. They have to become contributing factors into the ecosystem, not standalone profiteering organizations that they are today. They have to be able to contribute to the security, to the veracity, to the transparency back to the investor, and that's what we're building out today. So why are we shifting into the blockchain? I mean, there's probably a lot of, ubiquitous reasons that we've been talking about here. Everyone here is an expert in blockchain. So I'm not going to go into some of the high-level details of the macro, but I'm going to show you our vision on what's actually happening. We're disrupting ourselves to a certain extent, but I want to talk about the specific use cases why blockchain is perfect for asset management. Manual paperwork, I can't emphasize that enough. I'm sure people have gone into banks. You fill out paperwork. Actually, in Korea, it's a lot harder to do things at the bank. You need even more paperwork to get things done. And you can do mobile banking very quickly, but you'll need 9 different codes to make sure that it's secure. Everything that's manual about the asset management process is another barrier, and it's another point of failure that we need to remove by using smart contracts for that investment contract itself. The second thing, what I talked about before, we have to align the interests of those that are managing the wealth and those that are investing. There's a term called moral hazard that usually comes in financial services. It means that I, as the person managing the money, have no real incentive to protect the best interests of the underlying investor as long as I can maximize my own profit. But if you are a part of a system, a blockchain system, that forces you to contribute, that forces you to make sure that the information is correct and transparent to the investor for the lowest cost possible, you are incentivized automatically to put the interests of the participants first, in addition to your own. And then the third, this is the same thing as why we want to put everything into the blockchain. We can remove fraud. Think about that for a second. What if we can remove fraud from the system altogether? And this doesn't mean that it's an open system where every single dollar in my wallet has to be visible to every other investor in the world. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that things like Ponzi schemes cannot occur because the system is being verified by other people that collectively say, well, that's not correct. And I'll use my computing power, or I'll use my time